October 12, 2006, Pinewood, Missouri. The search party spread through the dense woods surrounding the small town of Pinewood. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, illuminating patches of underbrush and tall oak trees. Michael. Shh. Tom Benson's voice echoed through the forest.
Michael Watson.
8-year-old Michael had vanished that afternoon after school. His backpack was found at the edge of the woods behind Pinewood Elementary, but the boy was gone. His mother, Sarah Watson, a single parent working as a nurse at the local clinic, had raised the alarm when he didn't return home by 5 p.m. As midnight approached, the temperature dropped to near freezing. Tom Benson gathered the volunteers at the command post, their breath visible in the cold air. "We'll resume at first light," he announced, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. "The state police will bring in dogs and more equipment tomorrow." Sarah clutched Michael's favorite dinosaur toy, her knuckles white. "He's out there, alone, in the cold," she whispered. Nobody said what they were all thinking. Children who weren't found within the first 24 hours rarely came home alive. July 15, 2023. Pinewood, Missouri. Sarah Watson unlocked the door to her modest home, the same one she had lived in for over 20 years. A collection of photographs lined the hallway wall. Michael at age 8, his school portrait. Then, the age-progressed images created by the National Center for Missing Children, Michael at 13, 18, and finally 25. At 58, Sarah's hair had turned completely gray. She had never left Pinewood, never given up hope that someday she would find answers about her son. The phone rang as she set her grocery bags on the kitchen counter. "Mrs. Watson? This is Sheriff Daniels." The new sheriff, Tom Benson's successor? Sarah's heart skipped a beat. These calls came occasionally. Remains found, potential sightings, new leads that inevitably led nowhere. "We found something," Daniels said, his voice strange. "We need you to come to the station." "Is it?" Sarah couldn't finish the question. "He's alive, Mrs. Watson. We think we found Michael." 25 miles northeast of Pinewood, deep in the Ozark wilderness, Park Ranger Ellie Martinez had been tracking what locals called the forest phantom, a figure occasionally glimpsed, moving through the trees, always vanishing before anyone got close. That morning, following reports from hikers about stolen supplies, she discovered the cave entrance, partially hidden behind a waterfall, in a remote section of the state park. "Hello?" she called, shining her flashlight into the darkness. "Park Ranger, I'm just checking if anyone's here." The beam illuminated crude furnishings, a makeshift bed of leaves and stolen camping gear, containers for water collection, a pile of tattered clothes. Then her light found him, a thin man with wild hair and beard, crouched in the corner like a cornered animal. His eyes, bright blue and terrified, squinted against the light. "It's okay, Ellie," said softly, recognizing fear rather than aggression. "I'm not going to hurt you." The man didn't speak, but when she slowly raised her phone to take his picture, he didn't run. Later, when the facial recognition software matched his features to the age-progressed image of Michael Watson, the search that had begun 17 years ago finally ended. But finding Michael was only the beginning. Sarah Watson sat motionless in the sterile hospital waiting room, her hands trembling as she clutched her purse. The clock on the wall seemed to move in slow motion. 17 years of searching, hoping, and praying had led to this moment. Yet she wasn't prepared for what awaited behind the closed door. Dr. Emily Ramirez, the hospital's chief psychiatrist, entered the waiting area with a gentle smile. "Mrs. Watson is ready to see you now." "How is he?" Sarah managed to ask, her voice barely audible. "Physically, he's malnourished and has some dental issues, but surprisingly healthy, considering the circumstances," Dr. Ramirez explained. "Psychologically, ... it's complicated. He hasn't spoken more than a few words. He's frightened, disoriented, and seems to have created his own language and systems over the years. But there's recognition in his eyes when we mentioned your name." Sarah nodded, trying to absorb the information. "What should I expect?" "Approach slowly. Don't expect too much too soon. This is just the first step in what will be a long journey." The door opened to a private room where a thin man sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window. His hair had been cut, his beard trimmed, but his posture was tense, like an animal ready to flee. When he turned toward the door, Sarah gasped. Despite the years and changes, she would know those eyes anywhere, the same bright blue eyes that had looked up at her when she tucked him in at night, when she bandaged his scraped knees, when she waved goodbye on that last ordinary day in 2006. "Michael," she whispered, frozen in the doorway. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her face. His lips parted, and after a long moment he spoke his first complete sentence since being found. "I remember your voice," he said hoarsely, as if the words themselves were painful to form. "You used to sing?" Sarah's knees weakened as tears spilled down her cheeks. She took a small step forward, then another, until she was standing before him. Slowly, giving him time to retreat if he wanted, she reached out and touched his hand. "Yes," she whispered. "I used to sing to you every night before bed." His fingers twitched beneath hers, and then hesitantly closed around them. Sheriff Mark Daniels spread the case files across his desk as FBI Special Agent Teresa Coleman reviewed them. The national media had descended on Pinewood like a swarm of locusts, turning the small town into the center of a sensational story that captured America's attention: the cave boy of Missouri. "We need to understand what happened," Agent Coleman said, her expression grave. "A child doesn't just vanish and survive in the wilderness for 17 years without help or contact. Something doesn't add up." Daniels nodded, pushing forward. "The medical reports, according to the doctors. He shows signs of long-term isolation, but there are inconsistencies. Some of his teeth have had dental work, though not recently. His knowledge of certain things, like how to make fire, trap small animals, even rudimentary first aid, suggests someone taught him survival skills." "What about his mental state?" "The psychiatrists say he exhibits traits consistent with severe isolation and trauma, but he's not completely feral. He understands language, though he's selective about when he speaks. He's created elaborate systems for survival that show remarkable intelligence and adaptability." Agent Coleman studied the map on the wall where red pins marked the cave location. "In Pinewood, 25 miles? That's a significant distance from where he disappeared." "And here's where it gets strange," Daniels said, pulling out a thick folder. "Over the years, there have been dozens of reports of stolen supplies from campsites, cabins, and even some stores in the area. Food, clothing, matches, basic tools. We always attributed it to regular thieves or wildlife, and we're wondering if it was Michael all along, or someone who was helping him," Coleman added. "I want to interview everyone who was close to the family in 2006. Teachers, neighbors, friends. And I want the original case files from Sheriff Benson." "That's another problem," Daniels said grimly. "Tom Benson died 3 years ago, heart attack. And some of the original case files are missing, the interview transcripts with a local man named Frank Harley, who reported seeing Michael near the woods that day. Benson's widow says he became obsessed with the case, even after retirement. Kept working it until the day he died." Coleman's eyes narrowed. "What do we know about this Frank Harley?" "That's just it, not much. He moved away from Pinewood about a year after Michael disappeared. No forwarding address. Find him," Coleman said. "And I want to know everything about Michael's father. Sarah Watson raised Michael alone, correct? Where was the father when the boy vanished?" Daniels hesitated before answering. According to the original report, David Watson left when Michael was 2. Sarah hadn't heard from him in years. "Well," Coleman said, picking up her phone, "we're going to hear from him. Now." The small house on Maple Street had been prepared for Michael's return. Familiar objects from his childhood carefully arranged, old photographs displayed. His bedroom preserved almost exactly as he had left it 17 years ago. The doctors had recommended surrounding him with items that might trigger memories and help him reconnect with his past. Sarah watched anxiously as Michael moved through the living room, touching things with cautious curiosity: the old piano where she had taught him his first notes, the height markings on the kitchen door frame, the collection of dinosaur figurines he had loved. Dr. Ramirez sat quietly in the corner, observing the interaction. They had established a routine over the past week: 2 hours at the house each day, then back to the hospital where Michael felt safer, more contained. Each day, he seemed to remember a little more, speak a few more words. There was a dog. Michael said suddenly, picking up a framed photograph. Sarah smiled through tears. Yes, Rusty. He was just a puppy when you went away. He lived to be 13. Michael, before we dive deeper, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a true story that time tried to erase. This has gone cold, for the forgotten are remembered. Now, let's go back. Copy of Where the Wild Things Are. You read this to me? He said. It wasn't a question. Every night for a year, he knew all the words by heart. Michael took the book and sat cross-legged on the floor, opening it carefully. His movements were strange, a mixture of childlike wonder and the wariness of a man who had learned to survive by being constantly alert. He began to turn the pages, his lips moving silently with the familiar words. Dr. Ramirez leaned closer to Sarah. This is remarkable progress, she whispered. But there's still so much we don't understand. Has he mentioned anything about how he ended up in that cave? Or who might have helped him? Sarah shook her head. He still hasn't talked about anything that happened after he disappeared. The psychiatrist said not to push him. Of course, Dr. Ramirez agreed. But the authorities need answers. There are concerns. What kind of concerns? Sarah asked, her protective instincts flaring. Before the doctor could answer, Michael's voice interrupted them. He was staring at a photograph on the wall, a school picture showing him with his third-grade class. Mr. Harley, he said, his voice suddenly cold, took me to see the deer. Sarah froze. Frank Harley? Your science teacher. Michael's hands began to shake, the book dropping to the floor. His breathing quickened as he backed away from the photograph, his eyes wide with a fear that seemed to come from somewhere deep and dark. He said there were baby deer in the woods, Michael whispered. He said you knew I was going with him. And then, for the first time since his return, Michael began to scream. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors and Michael's ragged breathing. After his breakdown at the house, the doctors had sedated him, concerned that pushing too hard too fast might cause irreparable psychological damage. Sarah sat beside his bed, her hand resting near his, but not touching, respecting the boundaries he needed. Agent Coleman stood by the window, her voice low as she spoke to Sheriff Daniels. We need to find Frank Harley, now. Already on it. Daniels replied, We've got alerts out in all 50 states. His teaching license was never renewed after 2007. And his social security number hasn't been used for tax purposes since 2009. It's like he disappeared. Nobody just disappears, Coleman said firmly. Not without help or planning. Sarah overheard them and looked up, her face drawn with exhaustion and worry. Frank was well liked in Pinewood. He taught science to elementary and middle school students for almost 10 years before Michael disappeared. He volunteered for community events, organized nature walks for the kids. Everyone trusted him. That's often the case with predators, Coleman said, her tone gentle but direct. Oh, they cultivate trust deliberately. Can you think of anything unusual about his relationship with Michael? Any special attention? Gifts? Outings? Sarah closed her eyes, thinking back through the fog. Of 17 years, he praised Michael's curiosity about nature, said he had a scientific mind. Her brow furrowed. There was a science club that met after school once a week. Michael loved it. Frank would take the kids on short field trips to collect leaves or observe wildlife. Always in groups? Daniels asked. I think so. But Sarah hesitated. About a month before Michael disappeared, he came home excited about seeing a fox den. He said Mr. Harley had shown him and that it was their special secret because the other kids might scare the foxes away. Coleman and Daniels exchanged looks. I didn't think anything of it then, Sarah continued, her voice breaking. God, I should have known. I should have protected him. This isn't your fault, Coleman assured her. Predators are manipulative experts. They groom not just the child, but the entire community. A soft voice from the bed interrupted them. Amy wasn't alone. Ow. They all turned to see Michael awake, his blue eyes clear despite the sedation. Frank, Michael said, the name seeming to cause him physical pain. He took me to the woods to see the deer. But when we got deep into the forest, there was another man waiting. You remember what he looked like? Coleman asked gently. Michael's eyes unfocused, looking back through time. Tall, gray beard. He smelled like cigarettes and something sweet. Frank called him David. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. David, are you sure that was the name? Michael nodded slowly. Frank said, David's been waiting to see you for a long time. Coleman moved closer to the bed. Michael, David is the name of your biological father. The monitors began to beep faster as Michael's heart rate increased. He said he was my real dad, that you had kept me from him. His eyes found Sarah's, confused and hurt. He said you lied to me my whole life, and now I was going to live with him. Sarah's face drained of color. David left us when you were 2. He was abusive, had drug problems. The court granted me full custody and a restraining order against him. He disappeared after that. I never heard from him again, till he came back for his son, Daniel said grimly. Michael's hands clutched at the hospital blanket. I tried to run away, to get back to you, but they caught me. Frank hit me. His voice broke. David said I needed to be taught respect. They took me to a cabin far away from town. I was there for, I don't know how long. What happened then, Michael? Coleman asked, careful to keep her voice calm. Despite the horror of what she was hearing, they fought, Michael said, his voice dropping to a whisper. Frank and David. About money, I think. David had been drinking. They pushed each other. Frank fell and hit his head on the fireplace. Michael's breathing became shallow. There was so much blood. David panicked, said we had to leave. We drove. For hours in the dark, deep into the woods. Sarah moved closer, her heart breaking for her son. Is that when you went to the cave? Michael shook his head. No. First, there was another cabin, more remote. David said we'd stay there until he figured things out, but he kept drinking, kept getting angrier. Said it was my fault Frank was dead. My fault he had to hide. Michael's eyes filled with tears. One night, when he passed out, I ran. Just ran into the forest as far as I could. I found the cave by accident, fell into it during a storm. And David never found you? Daniels asked. He searched. I could hear him calling sometimes in the first year. I learned to hide, to be silent. I was so scared he'd find me. Michael looked directly at Sarah for the first time. I wanted to come home, but I didn't know the way. And then I started to believe what he'd said about you not wanting. Sarah moved to the bed and, with heartbreaking gentleness, took her son's hand. I never stopped looking for you. It's not for one day. Michael's fingers tightened around hers. I know that now. Coleman stepped forward. Right, Michael, we need to. Fine, David. Do you know his full name? Or what happened to him after you escaped? Michael tensed. I don't know. I avoided people. Stole what I needed to survive. Sometimes I'd get close enough to campgrounds to hear news, music. Once I found a backpack with a radio inside. How I learned what year it was. He paused, a shadow crossing his face. But about 5 years ago I saw him, David. Daniels asked sharply. He was hunting in the forest, near my cave. Older, but I recognized him. I hid and followed him back to where he'd parked his truck. Michael closed his eyes, concentrating. The license plate had an eagle on it. Missouri.Wildlife Conservation. Coleman was already on her phone. I need a database search on all Missouri Wildlife Conservation license plates registered between 2017 and 2019. Cross-reference with the name David Watson or variations. She turned back to Michael. You've given us more than enough to find him. You're safe now. I promise you that. But the look in Michael's eyes suggested he hadn't felt safe in 17 years and couldn't quite believe he ever would again. Dr. Eliza Morgan, one of the country's leading experts in trauma recovery and reintegration, arrived in Pinewood 3 weeks after Michael's discovery. The modest local hospital had become a hub of activity, with specialists from various fields converging to study and assist with what many were calling the most extraordinary case of survival and adaptation in modern history. Dr. Morgan sat across from Michael in the hospital's garden courtyard, a space designed to feel open yet secure. At 25, Michael had spent more of his life in isolation than in society, creating unique challenges for his treatment. "I understand you've been having difficulty sleeping indoors," she said, her voice neither patronizing nor clinical, but conversational. Michael nodded, his gaze continuously scanning their surroundings, a habit formed from years of vigilance. "The ceiling feels... wrong. Too flat, too permanent." He struggled to articulate sensations that had no simple vocabulary. A moment, and Dr. Morgan waited patiently. She had learned that his silences weren't resistance, but processing his mind navigating between the isolated world he had inhabited and the overwhelming one he now faced. "Wake before dawn," he finally said. "Check trap set the night before. Collect water from the stream near the cave entrance more. After rain, less in summer. Store it in containers, ... Containers I took from campsites." He glanced at her, a flicker of shame crossing his face. "I stole things, to survive." "Of course you did," Dr. Morgan said, matter-of-factly. "Survival is the most basic human instinct." This seemed to ease something in Michael. He continued, his words coming more freely. "Mornings for hunting-gathering. Afternoons for maintenance, fixing tools, preparing food, reinforcing the cave entrance. I wove branches to hide it during the first year. Later, I planted vines that grew over the opening. Natural camouflage." Dr. Morgan nodded, impressed by his ingenuity. "In the evenings." "Those were the hardest," Michael admitted, his voice dropping, too quiet. "I would talk to myself sometimes, to remember what words sounded like. I made up stories, reimagined books I had read as a child." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "I performed entire movies from memory. Star Wars was my favorite." The revelation of this deeply human detail, boy reciting beloved movies to himself in the darkness, struck Dr. Morgan profoundly. In her extensive career working with trauma survivors, she had witnessed countless manifestations of the human spirit's resilience. But Michael's adaptations were extraordinary. "Did you ever consider making contact with people? Coming back to civilization?" she asked. Michael's expression darkened. "After the first few years, I wasn't sure what was real anymore. My memories of home, or the things David had told me. And later, ... double quotes," he trailed off, struggling. "Later," Dr. Morgan gently prompted. "Later, I wasn't sure I was human enough anymore." His hands twisted together. "I'd watch hikers sometimes, families at distant campsites. They seemed like a different species. I didn't know how to be that anymore." Dr. Morgan leaned forward slightly. "Yet part of you remembered. You kept your language, your memories. You didn't become feral, as some might expect in such extreme isolation." "I had books," Michael said. 3 of them. I found them in a backpack. Someone left at a campsite, a dictionary, a wilderness survival guide, and ... double quotes. He hesitated, almost embarrassed. "Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban." Dr. Morgan couldn't help smiling. Michael's story proves that even after years in the dark, light can still break through if it moved you. Like this video, it helps others find stories that matter. And tell us, could you have survived 17 years alone? Drop your thoughts. In the comments, we'll feature the best ones